Hi, 4th and 5th graders. Today we are going to be reading chapters 17 and 18 of Matilda. In the last couple chapters we had learned about Miss Honey and kind of saw into her life a little with her house. She has a very tiny cottage and doesn't have a lot of money. She has no furniture, doesn't have enough money for food. So we're going to hear more, especially in chapter 17, which is titled Miss Honey's Story. I'm going to warn you now, my cat is kind of bugging me today, so if you see him, just ignore him. So chapter 17, Miss Honey's Story. "We mustn't hurry this," Miss Honey said, "so let's have another cup of tea, and do eat that other slice of bread. You must be hungry." Matilda took the second slice and started eating it slowly. The margarine wasn't all that bad. She doubted whether she could have told the difference if she hadn't known. "Miss Honey," she said suddenly, "do they pay you very badly at our school?" Miss Honey looked up sharply. "Not too badly," she said. "I get about the same as the others." "But it must still be very little if you're so dreadfully poor," Matilda said. "Do all the teachers live like this, with no furniture and no kitchen stove and no bathroom?" "No, they don't," Miss Honey said rather stiffly. "I just happen to be the exception." "I expect you just happen to like living in a very simple way," Matilda said, probing a little further. "It must make house cleaning an awful lot easier, and you don't have any furniture to polish, or any of those silly little ornaments lying around to have to be dusted around. And I suppose if you don't have a fridge, you don't have to go out and buy all sorts of junky things like eggs and mayonnaise and ice cream to fill it up with. It must save a terrific lot of shopping." At this point, Matilda noticed that Miss Honey's face had gone all tight in a peculiar-looking way. Her whole body had become rigid. Her shoulders were hunched up high, and her lips were pressed together tight as she sat there gripping her mug of tea in both hands and staring down into it as if though searching for an answer to these not quite so innocent questions. There followed a rather long and embarrassing silence. In the space of 30 seconds, the atmosphere in the tiny room had changed completely, and now was vibrating with awkwardness and secrets. Matilda said, "I'm very sorry I asked you those questions, Miss Honey. It is not any of my business." So there's Miss Honey. Hopefully you can see it. My lighting's really bad today because it's rainy out. There's Miss Honey. Matilda's asking these questions that you probably shouldn't ask someone that you're not super close with. And Miss Honey's kind of getting tight and stiff, and she's not really, she's saying, "No, I'm living how I should be," in a way. We're going to find out more, though. At this, Miss Honey seemed to rouse herself. She gave a shake to her shoulders, and then very carefully she placed her mug on the tray. "Why shouldn't you ask?" she said. "You are bound to ask in the end. You are much too bright not to have wondered. Perhaps I even wanted you to ask. Maybe that's why I invited you here. After all, as a matter of fact, you are the first visitor to come to my cottage since I moved in 2 years ago." Matilda said nothing. She could feel the tension growing and growing in the room. "You are so much wiser than your years, my dear," Miss Honey went on, that it quite staggers me. Although you look like a child, you are not nearly a child at all, because your mind and your powers of reasoning seem to be fully grown up. So I suppose we might call you a grown-up child, if you see what I mean." Matilda still did not say anything. She was waiting for what was coming next. "Up to now," Miss Honey went on, "I have found it impossible to talk to anyone about my problems. I couldn't face the embarrassment. And anyway, I lacked the courage. Any courage I had was knocked out of me when I was young. But now, all of a sudden, I have a sort of desperate wish to tell everything to somebody. I know you are only a tiny little girl, but there is still kind of magic in you somewhere. I've seen it with my own eyes." Matilda became very alert. The voice she was hearing was surely crying out for help. It must be. It had to be. Then the voice spoke again. "Have some more tea," it said. "I think there's still a drop left." Matilda nodded. Miss Honey poured tea into both mugs and added milk. Again she cupped her own mug in both hands and sat there sipping. There was quite a long silence before she said, "May I tell you a story?" "Of course," Matilda said. "I am 23 years old," Miss Honey said, "and when I was born, my father was a doctor in this village. We had a nice old house, quite large, red brick. It's tucked away in the woods behind the hills. I don't think you'd know it." Matilda kept silent. "I was born there," Miss Honey said, "and then came the first tragedy. My mother died when I was 2. My father, a busy doctor, had to have someone run the house and look after me. So he invited my mother's unmarried sister, my aunt, to come live with us. She agreed and came. Matilda was listening intently. How old was the aunt when she moved in? She asked. Not very old, Miss Honey said. I should say about 30. But I hated her from the start. I missed my mother terribly. And the aunt was not a kind person. My father didn't know that because he was hardly ever around, but when he did put in an appearance, the aunt behaved differently. Miss Honey paused and sipped her tea. I can't think why I'm telling you this, she said, embarrassed. Go on, Matilda said, please. Well, Miss Honey said, then came the second tragedy. When I was 5, my father died very suddenly. One day he was there, and the next day he was gone. And so I was left to live alone with my aunt. She became my legal guardian. She had all the powers of a parent over me, and in some way or another she became the actual owner of the house. How did your father die? Matilda asked. It's interesting you should ask that, Miss Honey said. I myself was much too young to question it at the time, but I found out later that there was a good deal of mystery surrounding his death. Didn't they know how he died? Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, hesitating. You see, no one could believe that he would ever have done it. He was such a very sane and sensible man. Done what? Matilda asked. Killed himself. Matilda was stunned. He did? She gasped. There's Matilda, shocked at finding out that Miss Honey's mom had died suddenly. Miss Honey's dad had died 3 years later in a mysterious way where everyone was shocked that he had killed himself. And that Miss Honey's mean aunt had been the one to actually take care of her. That's what it looked like, Miss Honey said. But who knows? She shrugged and turned away and stared out of the tiny window. I know what you're thinking, Matilda said. You're thinking that the aunt killed him and made it look as though he'd done it himself. I'm not thinking anything, Miss Honey said. One must never think things like that without proof. The little room became quiet. Matilda noticed that the hands clasping the mug were trembling slightly. What happened after that? She asked. What happened when you were left all alone with the aunt? Wasn't she nice to you? Nice, Miss Honey said. She was a demon. As soon as my father was out of the way, she became a holy terror. My life was a nightmare. What did she do to you? Matilda asked. I don't want to talk about it, Miss Honey said. It's too horrible. But in the end, I became so frightened of her, I used to start shaking when she came into the room. You must understand, I was never a strong character like you. I was always shy and retiring. Didn't you have any other relations? Matilda asked. Any uncles or aunts or grannies who would come see you? None that I knew about, Miss Honey said. They were all either dead or they'd gone to Australia. And that's still the way it is now, I'm afraid. So you grew up in the house alone with your aunt, Matilda said. But you must have gone to school. Of course, Miss Honey said. I went to the same school you're going to now, but I lived at home. Miss Honey paused and stared down at her empty tea mug. I think what I'm trying to explain to you, she said, is that over the years I became too completely cowed and dominated by this monster of an aunt that when she gave me an order, no matter what it was, I obeyed it instantly. That can happen, you know, and by the time I was 10, I had become her slave. I did all the housework. I made her bed, I washed and ironed for her, I did all the cooking. I learned how to do everything. But surely you could have complained to somebody, Matilda said. To whom? Miss Honey said. And anyway, I was far too terrified to complain. I told you, I was her slave. Did she beat you? Let's not go into details, Miss Honey said. How simply awful, Matilda said. Did you cry nearly all the time? Only when I was alone, Miss Honey said. I wasn't allowed to cry in front of her, but I lived in fear. What happened when you left school? Matilda asked. I was a bright student, Miss Honey said. I could easily have gotten into university. But there is no question into that. Why not, Miss Honey? Because I was needed at home to do work. Then how did you become a teacher? Matilda asked. There's a teacher's training college in Reading, Miss Honey said. That's only 40 minutes bus ride from here. I was allowed to go there on one condition. I came straight home every afternoon to do the washing and ironing and to clean the house and cook the supper. How old were you then? When I went into teacher's training, I was 18, Miss Honey said. You could have just picked up and walked away, Matilda said. Not until I got a job, Miss Honey said. And don't forget, I was by then dominated by my aunt to such an extent that I wouldn't have dared. You can't imagine what it's like to be completely controlled like that by a very strong personality. It turns you into jelly. So that's it. That's the sad story of my life. Now, I've talked enough. So, Miss Honey's aunt was so mean and so horrible to her that it created such a big fear in Miss Honey that no matter what the aunt said or told her to do, Miss Honey instantly would do it. Told her to go clean something, yep, she'd go do it. She was so scared of her that she automatically did whatever this aunt did because she was scared of what the repercussions, what the follow-up would be. Please don't stop, Matilda said. You haven't finished yet. How did you manage to get away from her in the end and come live in this funny little house? Ah, that was something, Miss Honey said. I was proud of that. Tell me, Matilda said. Well, Miss Honey said, I got my teacher's job. The aunt told me I owed her a lot of money. I asked her why. She said, because I have been feeding you for all these years and buying you shoes and your clothes. She told me it added up to thousands, and I had to pay her back by giving her my salary for the next 10 years. I'll give you £1 a week pocket money, she said, but that's all you're going to get. She even arranged with the school authorities to have my salary paid directly into her bank. She made me sign the paper. So the reason why Miss Honey's living with such little things in her house with no food is because the aunt said that I bought your food and clothes all these years. Now you owe me thousands of dollars. So for the next 10 years, you need to give me most of the money you make from your job. Does that seem fair? You shouldn't have done that, Matilda said. Your salary was your chance of freedom. I know, Miss Honey said. But by then I had been her slave nearly all my life. I hadn't had the courage or guts to say no. I was too petrified of her. She could still hurt me badly. How did you manage to escape? Matilda asked. Ah, Miss Honey said, smiling for the first time. That was 2 years ago. That was my greatest triumph. Please, tell me, Matilda said. Here they are again, talking. Sorry again, the lighting is not the greatest. I used to get up early, very early, and go for walks while my aunt was still asleep, Miss Honey said. And one day I came across this tiny cottage. It was empty. I found out who owned it. It was a farmer. I went to see him. Farmers also get up very early. He was milking his cows. I asked him if I could rent his cottage. You can't live there, he cried. It's got no conveniences, no running water, no nothing. I want to live there, I said. I'm a romantic. I've fallen in love with it. Please rent it to me. You're mad, he said. But if you insist, you're welcome to it. The rent will be 10 pence a week. Here's 1 month's rent in advance, I said, giving him 40 pence. And thank you so much. How super, cried Matilda. So suddenly you had a house of all your own. But how did you pluck up the courage to tell the aunt? That was tough, Miss Honey said, but I steeled myself to do it. One night, after I cooked her supper, I went upstairs and packed a few things I possessed in a cardboard box and came downstairs and announced I was leaving. I've rented a house, I said. My aunt exploded. Rented a house, she shouted. How could you rent a house? You have only £1 a week in the world. I've done it, I said. And how are you going to buy food for yourself? I'll manage, I mumbled, and rushed out the front door. Oh, well done you, Matilda cried. So you were free at last. I was free at last, Miss Honey said. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. But you've already managed to live here on £1 a week for 2 years, Matilda asked. I most certainly have, Miss Honey said. I pay 10 pence rent, and the rest just about buys me paraffin for my stove, and my lamp, and a little milk and tea for the bread and margarine. That's all I really need. As I told you, I have a jolly good tuck-in at the school lunch. Matilda stared at her. What a marvelously brave thing Miss Honey had done. Suddenly, she was a heroine in Matilda's eyes. Isn't it awfully cold in the winter? She asked. There they are talking again. So Matilda's kind of seeing her in new eyes. She's going, Miss Honey isn't this coward. She's brave and did this amazing thing. She becomes a heroine, which is like a hero in her eyes. I've got my little paraffin stove, Miss Honey said. You'd be surprised how snug I can make it in here. Do you have a bed, Miss Honey? Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, smiling again, but they say it's very healthy to sleep on a hard surface. All at once, Matilda was able to see the whole situation with absolute clarity. Miss Honey needed help. There is no way she could go existing like this indefinitely. You would be a lot better off, Miss Honey, she said, if you gave up your job and drew unemployment money. I would never do that, Miss Honey said. I love teaching. This awful aunt, Matilda said. I suppose she's living in your lovely old house. Very much so, Miss Honey said. She's still only about 50. She'll be around for a long time yet. And do you think your father really meant her to own the house? I'm not quite sure he didn't, Miss Honey said. Parents will often give a guardian the right to occupy the house for a certain length of time. But it was nearly always left in trust for the child. It then becomes the child's property when he or she grows up. Then surely it's your house, Matilda said. My father's will was never found, Miss Honey said. It looks as though somebody destroyed it. So a will states who gets what if someone dies. So if I had a will, it would say, well, my house would go to my brother, my car would go to this person. So it states who gets what in case you die. My cat would go to someone. Maybe I'd make Mrs. Sybil take the cat. My father's will was never found. They think it was destroyed. No prizes for guessing who, Matilda said. No prizes, Miss Honey said. But if there is no will, Miss Honey, then surely the house goes automatically to you. You are the next of kin. I know I am, Miss Honey said, but my aunt produced a piece of paper supposedly written by my father saying that he leaves the house to his sister-in-law in return for her kindness of looking after me. I'm certain it's a forgery. But no one can prove it. Forgery means it's a fake. Couldn't you try, Matilda said. Couldn't you hire a good lawyer and make a fight for it? I don't have the money to do that, Miss Honey said, and you must remember that this aunt of mine is a much respected figure in the community. She has a lot of influence. Who is she? Matilda said. Miss Honey hesitated for a moment. Then she said softly, Miss Trunchbull. So, we found out this horrible mean aunt is actually the horrible Miss Trunchbull. Did you see that coming? I know the first time I read this book, I did not see that coming. Now, some of you might have seen the movie or read the book previously, but let me know, were you shocked that Miss Trunchbull is this person we've been learning about? Chapter 18, the names. This is a super short chapter, so don't worry, because I know some of you get tired of me reading 2 chapters at once. This is 2-page flips, and that's it. So chapter 18 is called The Names. Miss Trunchbull, Matilda cried, jumping about a foot in the air. You mean she is your aunt? She brought you up? Yes, Miss Honey said. No wonder you were terrified, Matilda cried. The other day we saw her grab a girl by the pigtails and throw her across the playground fence. You haven't seen anything, Miss Honey said. After my father died, when I was 5 1/2, she used to make me bathe myself all alone. And if she came up and thought I hadn't washed properly, she would push my head under the water and hold it there. But don't get me started on what she used to do. That won't do any of us any good. No, Matilda said, it won't. We came here, Miss Honey said, to talk about you. And I've been talking about nothing but myself this whole time. I feel like a fool. I am much more interested in just how much you can do with those amazing eyes of yours. I can move things, Matilda said. I know I can. I can push things over. How would you like it, Miss Honey said, if we made some very cautious experiments to see just how much you can move and push? Quite surprisingly, Matilda said, if you don't mind, Miss Honey, I think I would rather not. I want to go home now and think about all the things I've heard this afternoon. Miss Honey stood up at once. Of course, she said. I have kept you far too long. Your mother will be starting to worry. She never does that, Matilda said, smiling. But I would like to go home now, please, if you don't mind. Come along, then, Miss Honey said. I'm sorry I gave you such a rotten tea. You didn't at all, Matilda said. I loved it. The two of them walked all the way to Matilda's house in complete silence. Miss Honey sensed that Matilda wanted it that way. The child seemed so lost in her thoughts she hardly looked where she was walking. And when they reached the gate of Matilda's house, Miss Honey said, "You had better forget everything I told you this afternoon." "I won't promise to do that," Matilda said, "but I will promise not to talk about it to anyone any more, not even to you." "I think that would be wise," Miss Honey said. "I won't promise to stop thinking about it, though, Miss Honey," Matilda said. "I've been thinking about it all the way back from your cottage. I believe I've got just a tiny little bit of an idea." "You mustn't," Miss Honey said. "Please forget it." "I would like to ask you 3 things before I stop talking about it," Matilda said. "Please, will you answer them, Miss Honey?" Miss Honey smiled. It was extraordinary. She told herself how this little snippet of a girl seemed suddenly to be taking charge of her problems with such authority, too. "Well," she said, "that depends on what the questions are." "The first thing is this," Matilda said. "What did Miss Trunchbull call your father when you were around the house at home?" "I'm sure she called him Magnus," Miss Honey said. "That was his first name." "And what did your father call Miss Trunchbull?" "Her name is Agatha," Miss Honey said. "That's what he would have called her." "And lastly," Matilda said, "what did your father, Miss Trunchbull, call you around the house?" "They called me Jenny," Miss Honey said. Matilda pondered these answers very carefully. "Let me make sure that I've got it right," she said. "In the house, at home, your father was Magnus, Miss Trunchbull's Agatha, and you were Jenny. Am I right?" "That's correct," Miss Honey said. "Thank you," Matilda said. "And now I won't mention the subject any more." Miss Honey wondered what on earth was going on in the mind of this child. "Don't do anything silly," she said. Matilda laughed and turned away and ran up the path to her front door, calling out as she went, "Goodbye, Miss Honey. Thank you so much for the tea." There they are, talking. And Matilda strangely goes, "What were these names that you were called?" Not quite sure why she wants to know these names, but she asked anyway. Now, we're getting close to the end of the book. And you might have think the most intense, dramatic things have happened. Not yet. So there's more to come. I hope you're enjoying the book. And we will be doing the comprehension. Let me check real quick. Just checking. We did 17. We're going to be doing the comprehension questions next week. As of right now, that's the plan. So things might change. But I hope that you're all doing well. And let me know if you have any questions. Bye.